Hello, class, and welcome to Sci 213 General Psychology. It's week 3. This week, I will review chapters 3 and chapters 4 in your textbook on the PowerPoint slides. Also, there is an exam coming up. It will be due midnight on Sunday, and it will cover chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4. This lecture will serve the purpose as to reviewing, of course, chapters 3 and 4, and also your weekly activities for this week. Great job on your assignments for week 2. I will have those graded by Monday evening. Please feel free if you have any questions, comments, concerns about any assignments or any past assignments or upcoming assignments. Please feel free to reach out to me. Like I said, I'm fairly easy to get a hold of. I usually email back within a couple of minutes, maybe if not a couple of minutes, 30 minutes to an hour. So just please feel free to reach out to me. I'm always here for if you need help or anything like that. So let's go ahead and jump right in to your weekly assignments. So this week we will be covering, of course, sensation, perception, and states of consciousness, which is really interesting. So this week you are required to complete the reading in the text, review the PowerPoints for text reading, and I will be going over those in the lecture. Read the Psychology Today article, as well as watch 2 videos. Watch the Test Your Brain videos by National Geographic, and these 2 videos. They're only about 9 to 10 minutes long, so they're fairly short and they're really interesting. So I do want you to look at those. Also, complete your Blackboard discussion. Of course, you need a substantial post of 200 words or more, and responding to 2 of your other classmates in 50 words or more. And then complete the first exam, sorry. So chapter 3 will focus on sensation and perception, and this is just an overview of what we will be talking about. And chapter 4 will be the states of consciousness, which is also really interesting. So yeah. And one last thing I want to talk about before we jump into the lecture is the study guide. So this is a study guide that you could use to help you study and prepare for the exam. Like I said, the exam is due Sunday at midnight, so you have a little bit of time to prepare for it. And it'll just give you, let me click on it. Okay, maybe you can't click on it. It's just a review of chapters 1, 2, 3, 4 that you can take a self-test in the book. And also go over the key terms for chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4. Sometimes these really help students. So if you want to try it out and see if it helps you for the exams, please feel free. And I think it's definitely a great resource. And then, like I said, here's the exam. You just click on it. It's 50 questions, multiple choice, and you only have one opportunity to take the exam. Unless something happens, please feel free to email me. I can reset the exam for you, but you only have one chance to take the exam. And I'm sure you all do really well. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in. And PowerPoint. That is chapter 4. Let's start with chapter 3. Like always, I have 30 million apps open. Okay. So chapter 3, sensation and perception. This chapter will preview how we sense and perceive the world, the visual system, the auditory system, and other senses. So sensation. Of course, this is the process of receiving stimuli, energies from external environments. And this goes to speak to the touch, taste, sight, feel, all that stuff that you learned about in biology, of course. It speaks to sensation and perception and how it affects you in terms of psychology. Because when it comes to, you may have heard some illnesses with, say for instance, autism. They might have a sensation, troubles with sensation or perception and different things like that. So these things, sensation and perception, are major when it comes to certain specific mental health issues. And lastly, perception, process of organization and interdependent, interpreting sensory information. I was trying to make that a word that it wasn't. So yeah, processing the information, gathering information, in some mental illnesses, or even Some people, just not even with mental illnesses, may have issues with perception. So bottom up processing. It's information about external environment, and it involves sensory receptors that lead to the brain. And this helps make sense of information. This is a process in terms of like whenever you are experiencing something traumatic, this is how your brain makes sense of what just happened to you. And then, like it says, bottom up, and then top down processing. It starts with cognitive processes at higher levels of the brain. So this starts with the brain, and then it feeds down to other areas of the brain. So with bottom up, it's your sensory receptors, your feeling, your touch, your sensations that lead to your thoughts and your processing in your brain. And then top down, it starts with your brain. So you're thinking about it, you're trying to visualize and make sense of the information from your brain, and then leading to your sensory receptors. So adaptation. So everyone, from the beginning of time, adaptation has been a major part of psychology. It improves the species' chance for survival. Just as they talk about, in earlier times, cavemen, how we've evolved from cavemen. So adaptation is a huge part of not just psychology, but the world in general. And organisms must be able to sense and respond quickly. So just like with vaccinations and different viruses and diseases, these organisms are adapting to our cures and our vaccinations and our different things like that. So they're making these adaptations to grow and improve and to continue their life. Sensory receptors. Sensory receptors are specialized cells that detect stimulus information and transmit it to sensory afferent nerves and to the brain, as well as openings through which the brain and nervous system experience the world. So yeah, this is basically what I was talking about as well in terms of sensation, how your sensory receptors affect your brain and how you're experiencing and how you're processing and trying to understand or make sense of what's going on. So your sensory receptors are part of the process of sensation that help influence making sense of things inside your brain. So here's a diagram of human senses. So like I said, the sight, touch, taste, smell, hearing, things like that. These are all types of your senses. And you guys should know this. I believe this was taught in biology. So just a brief overview of that. So there's multiple types of sensation. Photoreception, which is the detection of light perceived as sight. This, of course, you see things with your eyes and you visualize things. So this is important as well. Mechanoreception, detection of pressure, vibration, and movement perceived as touch, hearing, and equilibrium. So this helps you keep balance. And as well as being able to touch things and feel them and hear. Chemoreception is detection of chemical stimuli perceived as smell and taste. And this is really interesting because chemotherapy and chemoreception is the detection of chemical stimuli. So if you're ever wondering or thinking about what this may be, just make that correlation in your mind. Chemotherapy, chemoreception. Very similar. Just chemo, of course, is a chemical. Confused senses. Excuse me. So I'm not going to talk too much about these, except for phantom limb pain. This is interesting. Studies have shown that with, say, for instance, for military people that have gone into combat and lost a limb, they've reported pain in that amputated arm or leg. So if you haven't seen, on Grey's Anatomy there's an example where one of the doctors lost her limb and she would have pain. And it comes with the sense of, sometimes it may cause people to become depressed or anxiety. You're fiending for this limb that isn't there anymore. And it's a very interesting process because your mind is still thinking that this limb is still there when it's actually not. So that's an interesting confused senses process that I will discuss, or that I wanted to discuss, so which is really interesting. Okay, so thresholds. I'm going to move on. Thresholds. For outcomes and signal detection, you guys can review over that. So attention. Attention is also a key point in psychology, because when you're speaking of attention, you're thinking about ADHD, attention deficit disorder. These things, attention is very important. So there's multiple levels of attention: selective, shiftable. Selective is the cocktail party effect. So this, when people say selective hearing, this is where that term kind of comes into play, where you're at a cocktail party and you have to have your attention in multiple areas. It's not just in one main area, it's in multiple areas, because you're trying to eat, you're trying to communicate and talk to different people and mingle and different things like that. So that is selective. Shiftable. Novelty, size, color, and movement. So this is more specific as to focusing on different color, size, movement. So not necessarily selective in terms of looking at a broad range of different things. It's more on one thing or in one specific. And intentional blindness. Okay, so let's move on. Cultural influences which stimuli we attend to as perceive the world. And oftentimes we'll talk about this in this course, how culture plays a major impact on psychology. And I also think that it plays a huge impact of perception and sensory stimuli. So there's just a quick brief touch on that. Perceptual stat is a predisposition or a readiness to perceive something a particular way. And that also speaks to the cultural. There's many modes of areas of where someone may perceive something. In psychology, we call it the biopsychosocial model. So you have the biology. So that could be genetics, how something is perceived in regards to genetics. The social, which is the environment. They grew up in a specific environment, which may help them be predisposed or have a specific perception of something. And the psychological, and of course that's the psyche of the mind and how they think about certain things. So this model speaks to how we perceive things and how sensory is processed as well. Sensory adaptation, and like I said, we talked about adaptation. It's the change in responsiveness of sensory system based on average level of surrounding stimulation. So visual stimuli. So we talked about the different senses, and light being one of them. It's a form of electromagnetic energy. And of course we talked about, we haven't talked about, but in biology class you've probably learned about a wavelength, amplitude, purity. So wavelength is the hue of the color, amplitude is the brightness, and purity is the saturation or richness. So this is all in reference to what we see and what we visualize within our body. So here's a diagram of the electromagnetic spectrum. So the structure of the eye. So I'll briefly go over this. The sclera is the white outer part of the eye, helps maintain shape of the eye and protects the eye from injury. The iris is the colored part of the eye, and the pupil is opening in the center of the iris. Size controlled by muscles in iris. So, and a lot of times you've probably heard about pupils being dilated, or specifically when you go to the doctor or eye doctor, and they have to put those drops in your eyes to dilate your pupils so they can see on the inside of your eye. So that's really interesting too. And with some specific drugs or medications, this may happen to your pupil as well. So it's very interesting in terms of psychology. Cornea is the clear membrane just in front of the eye. Your lens is a transparent, somewhat flexible disc-like structure. The cornea and the lens both bend light falling on the surface of the eye just enough to focus it on the retina. So it has a huge part in your vision. And the retina is a multi-layered light-sensitive surface at the back of the eye, converts visual stimuli to neural impulses. And this is just an overview or a figure of what I just talked about, so you can compare on this diagram as to which part is what. So I'm not going to go into detail about visual receptor cells. You guys can review that more in detail in your textbook. So let's move on. Visual processing, color vision. Try to see what else I want to talk about in terms of the eye and so Gestalt. He's a major key figure in psychology, as well as Freud and so many others. But Gestalt psychology, the school of thought interested in how people naturally organize perception according to certain patterns. Whole is different from the sum of its parts, and this is a key component to Gestalt's theory. The whole is different from the sum of its parts. So perceiving shape, and specifically in terms of how people perceive things, this modality speaks to you're different from your different experiences that you may experience in your life. So that's the whole concept behind whole is different from the sum of its parts. And it's naturally, of course, how people organize their perception according to certain patterns or experiences or behaviors they may have experienced. So it's really interesting. And you'll learn more about that when we go into a little bit of detail further down in the text. Gestalt principles, closure, proximity, similarity, perceiving motion. Yeah, nature of sound, structure of the ear. Like I said, these are all things that we most likely learned in biology, but they play a huge major role in psychology in terms of how we think, perceive, and different things like that. So it's just an overview of biology terms, but they do have a huge impact on psychology. Theories of hearing, other senses. Of course, we talked about sight, touch. So skin and chemical senses are senses as well. Touch, temperature, endorphins. So taste. I'll go into a little bit of detail about this. Detecting chemicals dissolved in saliva. The four taste qualities: sweet, sour, bitter, salty. So there's, in terms of genetics, in the biopsychosocial model of psychology, there's specific things that people are predisposed to in terms of genetics and psychology. Some people may experience different tastes and touch. One in particular that I know is cilantro. So some people love the taste of cilantro. Others, they feel like it tastes like toothpaste. And I found that very interesting in terms of how our brain processes how we're tasting things. So one person may taste it how it's supposed to be tasted, and the other person may taste something completely different. And I found that to be really interesting in terms of how our bodies and our minds correlate specific tastes. And what may be bitter or salty to someone may be sweet or sour to someone else. So it's just really interesting along those lines. So taste fibers respond to a range of chemicals spanning multiple tastes. Umami is part of the four taste qualities. So it's typically, some people have a difficult time tasting this specific flavor, which is very interesting. Some people may experience it, some others may not. But like I said, it's part of the four senses, but it's not always talked about. It's very interesting. So if you want to look up that a little bit more, it's definitely something to be mindful of. Let's see. Next slide. Detection of airborne chemicals, olfactory epithelium, neural pathway. Yeah, I'm just going to pass over these. And I think that's it for the senses. Like I said, it's, basically it's just an overview of what you've learned thus far in your careers. in terms of sight, taste, touch, different things like that. So let's go ahead and move on to chapter 4. Get into some more of the juicy stuff. So states of consciousness. Consciousness is a major component in psychology because a lot of the theories have stem from consciousness, specifically for Freud. So this chapter will preview the nature of consciousness, sleep and dreams, psychoactive drugs, and hypnosis and meditation. So consciousness. James was a psychologist who was the first to describe consciousness as a stream. So in other words, he had the idea that a continuous succession of experience determines consciousness. So trying to put this in more layman's terms, he saw the stream of consciousness as an unending parade of thoughts, feelings, images, ideas, sensations, conceptions, and emotions that appear before our consciousness and awareness and then pass away. So it's really interesting to think about what are your thoughts on consciousness? Like, where does it come from? Is it something that we only do when we dream, or where does it come from? And William James did some extensive research on stream of consciousness and how consciousness plays a major impact on humans in general. And like this says, awareness of external events and internal sensations. So you have the metacognition, and this is in reference to thinking about your thoughts. Have you ever sat and thought about thinking about what you're thinking about? And metacognition speaks to that. Having thoughts about your thoughts is a process in psychology as well. Involves cerebral cortex and association of areas in the frontal lobes. So this slide too speaks to our assignment that we had last week with Phineas Gage, right? So the areas of his brain that were affected by his injury had a huge impact on who he was as a person after that injury. And it just goes to show that the brain is a major part in how and who we are as people. There's other areas and aspects in our lives that have an impact on who we are and who we may become. And that speaks to the biopsychosocial model as well. Your social environment has an impact as well as genetics. But our psychology, our psyche, our brain, our consciousness has a huge impact on who we are as people. Also, arousal. Arousal is a psychological state of being engaged with the environment. There's a lot of things that people are aroused about. Arousal is a huge thing that definitely impacts who you are as a person. Like I said, our psyche. You can be aroused by specific foods that you enjoy. You can be aroused by smells. You can be aroused by multiple things that humans encounter on a day-to-day basis. So consciousness in the brain. Awareness and arousal are associated with different parts of the brain. So like I said, there's two different parts that are affected by specific things in the brain. So awareness and arousal come from different parts of the brain. And they've always said, different studies have discussed this phenomenon. And I can also provide you with like specific links and other areas of how interesting this is. There's so many studies and different things you can look up. So if you ever have an article or something interesting that you've read, please feel free to either share it with your class or share it with me, because I love hearing and reading these specific things. A few of you have, sent me different articles to read that have been really interesting, and I love reading and hearing about different things that you guys find interesting. So areas of the prefrontal cortex appear to be involved in the ways that awareness goes beyond the input of sensory information. Arousal is determined by the reticular activating system. And that's similar to arousal. Oh, I'm sorry. It's the same exact thing on the slide. Before. But anyways, theory of mind. Individuals understanding that they and others think, feel, perceive, and have private experiences. And this speaks to the notion that you can't always expect people to do things the way you would do them. And this is a major thing in psychology, because I think that with specific people who are not just in mental health, but like in general, people always expect or think that someone is going to have the same experience as them. But we all have different experiences. We all experience things differently. And this just speaks to, your theory of mind of how you can see, you can think, feel, and perceive something a certain way, but also have that in the presence of mind to be able to understand and put yourself in other people's shoes to experience or think or try to understand or perceive what they are thinking and feeling. So I love that. Levels of awareness: higher level of consciousness, lower level of consciousness, altered states of consciousness, subconscious awareness, and no awareness. So yeah, and this goes a little more in depth as to what those levels of awareness are. So a higher level involves control processing, in which individuals actively focus their efforts on attaining a goal, the most alert a state of consciousness. So an example of that would be doing a math or science problem, preparing for a debate, talking an at-bat in a baseball game, which is very interesting. So let's go down to no awareness. I want to see what they have discussed for this. So Freud's belief that unconscious thoughts are too laden with anxiety and other negative emotions for consciousness to admit them. So an example of this would be having unconscious thoughts being knocked out by a blow or anesthetized. So when we're being put down for surgery, or being knocked out, if you're a boxer, being knocked out in the ring, these are times when we have absolutely no awareness. Subconscious awareness is interesting too. An example of this one will be during your sleeping or dreaming. This happened to me the other day. This can occur when people are awake as well as when they're sleeping and dreaming. So I had a dream, and I felt myself I felt like I was in my subconscious, because I felt like I was awake, but I was asleep. So it's a definitely interesting part of, the dreaming process and the sleeping process as to how there are different levels of consciousness and how those can be altered. So sleep, of course, is a natural state of rest for the body and mind and involves the reversible loss of consciousness. So sleep is a huge part of our brain and our functioning. Recently, I've learned that whenever you have a really bad brain injury or TBI or a concussion or something like that, most oftentimes the doctors would say, the old myth is, do not let your child or whoever it is fall asleep. But recently I've come to find out that if someone does experience a brain injury, you're supposed to let them sleep, because it helps the brain to heal, and it helps the brain regenerate all the things that may have happened to the brain at that moment. That is to say that I don't know if I'll be inclined to not wake the person up, but just as, like I said, adaptation and involvement, we have grown so much in the science world and the psychology world that these things are becoming more known. And I find that to be really interesting. So sleeping has major impacts on, revitalizing everything, your energy, your brain, your chemistry of all the things that are going on in your body. So it's really interesting. Just a tangent off of sleeping. And biological rhythms, periodic psychological fluctuations in the body, biological clocks. So biological clocks speaks to, so say for instance, if you go to work every day and you have to wake up at 7 o'clock, every day, Monday through Friday. So on Saturday and Sunday, when you don't have to go to work, our biological clocks are already pre-programmed to have us wake up at that specific time. So you may wake up at the time that you usually wake up during the week. But on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, you don't have to actually get up at that time, but you can relax. So our biological clocks are, of course, programmed within us from our environment and other things like that. Circadian rhythms. I won't go into that too much. Well, I guess I can. Daily behavioral or psychological cycle. It's a sleep, wake, body temperature, blood pressure, and blood sugar. So these are regulated with sleep. Suprachiasmatic nucleus. It's a small brain structure using retinal inputs to synchronize its rhythm with daily light and dark cycles. And that's to speak to, daylight times, nighttime, and different things like that. Biological clocks, desynchronizing the biological clock. So whenever you have a desynchronization of the biological clock, so say for instance you're off on spring break, and you didn't have to wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning on Monday through Friday, this speaks to how that biological clock can get thrown off of its regular schedule. So, or jet lag or different things like that. So flying on a plane, changing your work shifts, and that can cause insomnia. Resetting the biological clock. So bright light, melatonin, so sunlight can reset that biological clock as well. So like I said, if you're on spring break out at the beach, this can have an effect on your sleep. So why do we sleep? So evolutionary perspective is for protection. And it also speaks to, like I said before, I feel like when we sleep, our body is rejuvenating and getting and rehealing, whether it may be if you have a brain injury or if you have a sore body from working out. This rejuvenates our bodies and gets us to have that energy for the next day, which is conserve energy, restoration, brain plasticity. These are all things that I just touched on, and how it has a huge impact on who we are and our well-being and our health and our energy. So sleep deprivation. Everyone knows that when you don't get enough sleep, there's so many things that can go wrong. So lack of sleep is very stressful. And I can't stress this enough. Sleep is very important. So trouble paying attention to tasks and solving problems. Decreased brain activity, and it can also influence moral judgment. Yet many of us do not get sufficient sleep. Americans in general, for sure. We're on this time frame as to everyone's in a rush to get to work, everyone's in a rush to do this. It's like we never give ourselves enough time to sleep. And it's also interesting too, if you're ever interested in going into have a sleep study to see what your circadian rhythms are, what your levels of consciousness are, and what your optimal level of hours of sleep. It's very interesting to go and find that out, so you can know what type of sleep that you need to be getting throughout the week to maintain your energy, to maintain overall good mood, because sleep has an impact on mood as well. Adolescents, they have a problem as well in terms of getting enough sleep, because you're up playing the video games, you're up Facebooking it, you're up texting all night, talking on the phone. So this is something that I have seen a lot with adolescents, not getting enough sleep. And it has a huge impact on their lifestyle, whether it's in school, at home, and different things like that. So like I said, sleep is important. Sleep patterns change into middle/late adulthood. This is true. When you're younger, you can get less sleep than when you're older. So this has a very huge impact on mood, your brain activity, your judgment, problem solving, being able to handle tasks, paying attention, etc. Stages of wakefulness and sleep. So I'm going to move past this. Beta waves, alpha waves, yeah. So the sleep stages is something important or interesting. I talked about going to have a sleep study. So they'll monitor stages of sleep as well. So stage 1 is drowsy sleep. Myoclonic jerks or sudden muscle movements, EEG, characterized by slow, high amplitude of theta waves. So this is when you're really drowsy and not necessarily, in that deep sleep. So stage 2 is decreased muscle activity. So this is when you're creeping into that deep sleep mode, no conscious awareness of environment. Theta waves intersped with sleep spindles, which you can get a little more information on in your textbook. Also, stages 3 and 4 is referred to as delta sleep, and these are the deepest sleep. And bedwetting, sleepwalking, and sleep talking occur in these stages of sleep. So stage 3 is less than 50% delta waves, and stage 4 is more than 50% delta waves. So delta waves, of course, are the slowest and highest amplitude of brain waves, and this is where sleep is monitored. So the deeper sleep you are, the more delta waves you have, and the less you have, the lower range in sleep stage you're in. REM sleep, rapid eye movement. There's also a new study within psychology called EMDR, which studies the eye movement in some people, and it's really interesting. If you want to research that a little bit more, if you're going into psychology, of course. This is a therapy that they are using specifically for veterans. So EMDR is what it's called, and it studies the rapid eye movement, of course. So active stages during which dreaming occurs, fast wave activity similar to relaxed and wakefulness, likely plays a role in memory. Non-REM sleep, stages 1 through 4. Sleep cycles. So one sleep cycle, 5 stages of sleep. It's 90 to 100 minutes. It recurs several times a night. REM stages become progressively longer. So that's how your sleep cycles are monitored. Very interesting stuff. I've always thought this stuff was really interesting, and how it plays a role in, of course, your psyche too. Let's move on. Okay, well, no, let's not. Sorry. I'm trying to make this brief, but this stuff is really interesting. Reticular formation is the core of the brain system. It's a distinct pattern of neurotransmitters actively during each sleep stage, and it plays a crucial role in sleep and arousal. Neurotransmitters involved with sleep: serotonin, norepinephrine, acetylcholine. So we talked about this last week in your slides, and how neurotransmitters are how different mental illnesses are impacted within the body. So serotonin, norepinephrine, acetylcholine, these are all things that are involved with sleep, and specifically when you have a problem with sleep, or you have anxiety, these are the types of medications that will be prescribed to those who are having this issue. So this is important to remember and be aware of. Sleep and disease. So studies have shown that the lack of sleep has caused different diseases and things like that. So stroke and asthma, obesity and heart disease, immune system and infection, mental disorders, depression, of course, Alzheimer's disease, stroke, and cancer. So those are the how sleep can impact diseases. So sleep and sleep disorders. This has always been interesting to me too. Insomnia, I know a lot of people talk about having insomnia, is the difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep, even when the person has a chance to do so. So this is a difficulty falling asleep, and you see people staying up all night, not getting any rest. So that's what insomnia is. Sleepwalking, sleep talking, sleep eating. You guys know what those are. I've never met anyone to sleepwalk, but I do know a lot of people that sleep talk. And sleep eating is a new one as well. Nightmares and night terrors. You see these a lot from trauma. So sudden arousal from sleep and intense fear. So veterans that have PTSD may experience this. People that have been either assaulted, sexually assaulted, domestic violence situations, these people might have nightmares and night terrors. Narcolepsy is the sudden overpowering urge to sleep. I actually knew someone that had narcolepsy, and she would fall asleep anywhere. So it's definitely a problem. Sleep apnea. These individuals stop breathing and awaken to breathe better. Also, the newest one I've heard is sleep paralysis, and it's where you are sleeping, but you are awake and you cannot move. You're specific, kind of like in this paralyzed state. I know Kendall Jenner talks about having sleep paralysis. So if you watch the Kardashians or whatever, or you follow her as a model, you know that she struggles with this, and it's a scary disorder. You know, not being able to move, but and feeling like you're being paralyzed, but you're awake. It's kind of like creepy, but just interesting stuff in terms of sleep disorders. So dreams. So like I said, Freud is a major component of psychology, and he used to monitor and study dreams as well. So dreams symbolize unconscious wishes. He thought that whenever we dreamed, it was your unconscious feelings or sub being acted out in your subconscious. So manifest content, surface content, they're all symbolic to how you really feel. So latent content, hidden content, and the true meaning. So yeah, cognitive theory. Dreams are subconscious cognitive processing. Lack of attention to roles of the brain structures and activities in dreaming. Activation synthesis theory. Dreams as a result of synthesis and neural signals. Psychoactive drugs. So yeah, drugs have a huge impact on the nervous system. They alter consciousness, they modify perceptions, and they change your mood. So in terms of mental health, psychoactive drugs play a huge role in your consciousness, your perceptions, your mood, and different things like that. So tolerance. The tolerance for a drug is increasing the amounts for the same effect. Physical dependence is the need, and whenever you don't have this specific drug, you start to withdraw. And psychological dependence is a strong desire. And this is speaking more towards, I would say, psychology, medicines for mental health. I think it's in terms speaking of, you know, substances like alcohol, drugs, and different things like that. So the effect on these drugs play on the nervous system is huge. So addiction. Addiction is a physical or psychological dependence or both. So psychoactive drugs increase dopamine levels in the brain's reward pathways. And VTAs, nucleus accumbens, activation of limbic or prefrontal areas in the brain. So like I said, addiction plays a huge role in your brain and how your body responds. I teach this to the younger kids whenever we're in therapy, that, you know, your thoughts play a huge impact on your heart and your feelings, and things like that. And I can't stress it enough how drugs play a huge impact on your mind and how you function. So psychoactive drugs, depressants. There's multiple levels or different areas of psychotropic drugs. So depressants are psychoactive drugs that slow down mental and physical activity. So these are considered to be alcohol, barbiturates, tranquilizers such as Valium and Xanax, opiates, norepinephrine and heroin. These slow you down. These sometimes make you sleepy, and different things like that. So these aren't uppers, they're downers. So psychoactive drugs that are stimulants, aka uppers. Psychoactive drugs that increase the central nervous system activity. So caffeine, nicotine, amphetamines, such as crystal meth, cocaine, crack, MDMA, ecstasy. These are uppers. They usually typically up your mood, and increase your central nervous system activity. So people love these drugs. They give you that, I want to say, manic effect. When talking in terms of mental health, a lot of the times when we have someone that is bipolar, they hate the depressed side of their disorder, and then they love the manic side. So oftentimes they want to maintain that manic side, so they use different drugs like meth, crack, ecstasy to keep them on that high, because their psychotropic drugs are trying to level them out. So psychoactive drugs, hallucinogens. These modify a person's perceptual experiences and produce visual images that are not real. They're also called psychedelic drugs, and they include marijuana and LSD. so acid. Hypnosis. Hypnosis is an interesting study, and they used to do this back in the day. I say back in the day, like not like in the 70s. I'm talking about back in the day. And it's an altered state of consciousness. They used to use this in psychology or therapy. And it's a psychological state of altered attention and expectation. They used to try to hypnotize people into doing the things that they are suggesting or they want to do, specifically for smoking. They used to hypnotize people to try to get them to stop smoking, which is very interesting. Nature of hypnosis. There's 4 steps: minimizing distractions, maximizing comfort. So that's why they say, you know, close your eyes and get in a calm state. So concentration on something specific. They tell you to focus on what color shirt you're wearing, focus on how your feet feel touching the ground, different things like that. Information about what to expect in hypnotic states, and suggestion of events or feelings already occurring. And this kind of speaks towards meditation, because when you meditate, you're being calm, you're quiet, you're trying to focus on how your body feels. So that's an interesting correlation between the two. So explaining hypnosis. Hypnosis as a divided state of consciousness is the hidden observer. Social cognitive behaviors view of hypnosis, cognitive factors which include attitudes, expectations, belief, social context. Uses of hypnosis to dampen the brain process experimentally. Helps in understanding the effects of hypnosis and brain function. Most effective when combined with psychotherapy. Like I said, this was used in combination. So like I said, meditation, it has a strong correlation between hypnosis. It helps in attaining a peaceful state of mind. Mindfulness meditation is for depression, panic attacks, anxiety, chronic pain, stress, psoriasis. This is often used. I love meditation, mindfulness meditation, because it allows you to be calm and in a relaxed state. Meditative state of mind. Increased activation in basal ganglia and prefrontal cortex. So what this means is it increases there's responses in your brain in terms of feeling of wellness, and decreases, you know, whatever you may be panicking about, stressing about, or the feelings that you may be experiencing. So this concludes this lecture. Like I said, you guys have an exam due at the end of the week, so please, if you have any questions, please reach out to me, and go over the review of the material in your textbook, read your chapters, watch the videos. It will definitely help you for the exam. And this is it, and I want to say I look forward to finishing grading your assignments for the week, or the PowerPoint. From what I have seen so far, you guys have done an amazing job. So keep up the great work, and I will see you guys or talk to you guys next week. Have a great week.